Good morning or good very early afternoon, everybody. I hope everything works well. There is no complaint on the technical side. So, my name is Daniel Munich. I'm Executive Director of academic think tank IDEA. And I'm going to introduce and welcome our great guest, Harry Patrinos here, who is sitting on my right-hand side. But before I give him floor here, let me make few introductory notes. Those who appear here for the first time, let me assure you that you are in the building of the Economic Institute, which is an institute of the Academy of Sciences. And this academic institute constitutes a joint academic workplace with CERGE, which is part of Charles University. And IDEA is a virtual entity within CERGE-EI, just to make sure who is who. We are organizing these public events to foster understanding of important worldwide phenomena. And we are being nicely supported by Academy of Sciences. It's a program for this purpose, strategy of the Academy for the 21st century. So thank you, Academy. This is that. And now I can go to introduce Harry Patrinos, who is, in this case, not professor, as we are usually welcoming here, but he is practice manager for the Europe and Central Asia region of the World Bank. I have to say that he is newly assigned to this region, newly, and before he spent years managing projects, development projects in Latin America. So I think he knows much more about Latin America these days, but he spent part of his sabbatical here, or part of his leave here 15 or 10 years ago, so he knows quite a lot about the European educational system and so on. And he is coming back, in fact. He's not coming to Prague forever, but he is coming back to the region to supervise and manage projects which relate to education, school-based management, demand-side financing, and public-private partnerships. Just to let you know that his interests are broader than just education. And he managed many project operations in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and other countries. Now he will deal with countries like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and many other, maybe something with Czech Republic, but maybe we are too educated already. No need for that. We'll see. And but besides that, he has many academic publications, papers and books. So it's a unique combination of public policy management and academic knowledge and orientation. And he received his doctorate from the University of Sussex. So these are the important pieces of information about Harry Patrinos. And the last thing is to give you a very brief idea on the schedule or the program timing of this event. Harry will present for about 45 minutes, you know, what we are going to listen to. Then, if time allows, I will present very short reflection of what he said, stressing one important thing, that what he will be saying globally about all the countries developed, matters maybe even above average, much more above average for the Czech Republic, given its educational, industrial, and other structures. Because it will probably not be clear from his presentation for those who are not familiar with statistics on the Czech Republic. So, this being said, I am giving floor to Harry Patrinos. I will take care of shifting to his presentation so he can start already.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and I look forward to sharing with you some ideas on technology and its implications for education systems. I will try to finish in 45 minutes to give Daniel a chance to reflect. Excellent, thank you. As Daniel said, I am a manager in education at the World Bank, and for the last few months we've been working on a project called the Human Capital Project, which intends to highlight the importance of investing in people as a development strategy to make sure that our clients and ministers of finance recognize the importance of education and health investments. And along with the project, we launched the Human Capital Index, which ranks countries according to their commitment to human capital, looking at outcomes. And one of the important developments in recent years, and especially going forward, is how will the technological revolution affect education systems, the demand for skills, and the returns to education. That's what I intend to share with you today. So please, I look forward to your questions. If there's anything unclear, please interrupt me at any time. So I'll be drawing on two papers, one academic paper with my colleagues Raja and Kevin McDonald that tries to put together a model on the skills and what the implications are of automation and implications for education. And another less academic paper on the trying to articulate some of the skills or important characteristics that will help people avoid being replaced and keep them occupied in the labor market. So let me start by saying that in the last century we saw a tremendous increase in the average level of schooling worldwide, especially the last half of the 20th century. The gaps in schooling closed considerably. It's projected in the next few decades there'll be convergence in terms of years of schooling around the world. So tremendous progress on the access to education. Also, the returns to education remain high at 9 to 10% on average worldwide. And this is a statistic that's pretty much been maintained over several decades, which is interesting of itself. It's something I want to return to. The private returns to schooling higher now at the tertiary level than in the other level. This is a reversal of what we saw maybe 2 decades ago when the returns to primary schooling were highest. So we're seeing a shift in the demand for higher level skills reflected by a higher return to tertiary education. And as we've seen for the last several decades, the returns to education for women are higher than returns for men. This is for every year of schooling, and it's true at every level of education. So pretty much a worldwide phenomenon. Also, education, especially education in low-income countries, has a much higher return than pretty much anything else you might want to do with your money. Higher than bonds, stocks, housing market, and in World Bank projects, education rates of return are as high as any other sector, including transport and hard physical investments. So a very high return to education been maintained for several decades. But we have several issues. There's still an access issue despite the tremendous progress in access to schooling and average years of schooling. There's a definite quality issue, and this is global, but particularly in lower income countries. And at the same time, we're dealing with a shift in skills, and one that because of the nature of technological change is hard to predict or to prepare for. So first on access, according to UNESCO, there are still more than 260 million school-age children out of school. And among children who are in school, another 260 million are unable to read. I don't mean reading poorly. This is zero readers after 2, 3, and 4 years of primary schooling. And I'll show you some more data on that. In middle-income countries, children can certainly read, but even after 9 years of schooling, the typical middle-income country has about 50% of the students at a level of achievement which could be characterized as functional illiteracy for the world of work. And in developing countries, one in 4 people are unable to read at all. So tremendous issues on access and quality. This is from our Human Capital Index. These are the learning outcomes. We've harmonized almost all the international and regional assessments in order to have a common scale. And those countries particularly in the north, in the sort of blue colors, are the countries achieving the highest levels worldwide. So think of these as PISA scores above the OECD average. And you can see where most of Europe and Asia is, and North America. And then the yellows and I guess it's orange color are the countries that are achieving the least. So the level of achievement difference between high-performing East Asian countries and poorly performing Sub-Saharan African countries in the order of 300 to 400 points, similar to the PISA scale. So pretty much no learning taking place in low-income countries, and a large and probably increasing gap in knowledge worldwide. There's also the skills shift. This is something probably first shown in the 1990s, where Murnane and others, Murnane and Levy, tried to explain what was happening in the labor market and the demand for skills. And they were showing a significant decrease in what they called routine skills and a significant increase in demand for non-routine skills. This has been updated and the same trends have been found, some plateauing, but still a huge gap in the demand for non-routine skills. So people doing jobs that are less prone to automation, there's much more demand for those in the labor market, whereas routine jobs, even routine cognitive jobs, are in the decline. And more recently, Deming has looked at the impact of or the demand for jobs or tasks that require social skills. The characteristic here being working with other people, comparative advantage, sharing tasks and responsibilities. Huge demand, increased demand for those social skills, and an increase in the returns to those social skills in the United States. And like Murnane and Alter and others, Deming also shows decline in the demand for routine tasks and the subsequent decline in earnings for people doing those kinds of tasks. So we're getting evidence now that it's also these social skills, the need for interaction, group work, problem solving. We're now able to measure the demand and the returns for those skills. And we're seeing a big polarization in those kinds of tasks. So automation coming at a time when we're seeing these shifts in skills. Automation provides a lot of promise for us as consumers, decreasing the need for routine, repetitive kinds of labor, increasing production, lowering costs, lowering prices. So a lot of benefits for consumers and citizens, but a definite change in how labor will be demanded. So what is the net gain for this? Is it positive or negative? It depends who you talk to. So I want to, as an aside, mention Keynes. As economists, we always look up to what Keynes has said. And there was an essay published in 1930 where he was thinking or predicting what the world would look like at the time of his grandchildren. So he predicted the end of poverty. Being at the World Bank, we sincerely believe this is possible and advancing towards it. He also foresaw that advances in technology would propel economic growth, something that we're also seeing today. He also predicted that people would only work about 15 hours a week. And if you read the essay carefully, that's only because we need to do something with our time. So he really had a positive view of technology and how it would make us have a life of leisure and high productivity at the same time. But there's other views on technology and some much less positive views about what artificial intelligence will entail for the world. Stephen Hawking probably had the most dramatic statement saying that artificial intelligence would be the worst event in the history of civilization, and in an interview said that it could spell the end of mankind. Other people in science and technology have also voiced concern about AI. There's efforts to bring some measure of ethics to this. But whether these are positive or negative outcomes is probably something for the distant future. Right now, we want to focus on labor market outcomes. The promotion of AI and technology for bettering the world, there's certainly a lot of research and forecasts on this. Some of you may be familiar with Ray Kurzweil, who's written about this for many years and predicts that there will be a merging of humans with technology, and that it will be a positive thing in his view. The idea of the singularity comes from Kurzweil and others. But let's focus more on what this means for labor and education. The Fourth Industrial Revolution, a term I think coined by the World Economic Forum, arguing that we are entering this fourth phase in industrial development. The first three are well known, from mechanization to mass production, and the one we're living through today, computerization and automation. The prediction is that as we enter this new revolution, it will be a time of cyber and physical systems coming together and the changes that they entail. And if you read closely the World Economic Forum reports, a lot of them deal obviously with industry, some with labor, and some on social policy, but not much on education. The implication has been that education systems will evolve, will change to take into consideration labor demands, and people will somehow get the skills, or government will retrain workers to adjust to the new realities. And these are kind of optimistic views, I would think, and not a lot of analysis of what it means for education systems. And one of the things I'd like to explore is why we have this view of education, and what is the education system doing in response. So, dire predictions about what automation will mean for jobs. A lot of concerns that jobs will be replaced, that people will be unemployed, and that in fact that we have a future of high levels of unemployment. Some of these concerns have led to governments instituting programs like minimum basic incomes, where everyone receives a certain income each month from governments. There's been several experiments, Finland, Netherlands. Last time I checked, there were 8 jurisdictions doing some kind of basic income pilot. I see that as a kind of admission of, we're going to see massive levels of unemployment or unemployable people. We better do something now about it. The other headline is the numbers of people that will lose their jobs, right? It's always interpreted as losing their jobs. 1/3 will lose their job, 90% will lose their jobs in one study. The one that we use to model our analysis is from a study by Frey and Osborne at Oxford. They looked at each specific task, job task, and used their model and the opinions of machine learning experts to predict how susceptible that task was to automation. So how repetitive, routine the tasks were, and whether machines could someday replicate those tasks and obviate the need for someone doing that job. Frey and Osborne are careful to point out that these are not predictions of employment, but rather the number, the tasks and the probability that they are susceptible to automation. Many other things could happen. Many jobs that have been replaced because of technology, those people and those skills have been transferred to other and perhaps new jobs, and jobs that never existed before. But the important thing about Frey and Osborne is the number of tasks that are likely to be affected by automation. Not that people will lose jobs, but rather what tasks may not be performed by people in the future. Other studies have looked at which jobs are likely to disappear as a result of automation. There's a list here. I always find it interesting that computer programmers are on this list. So the same professionals that prepared AI might be susceptible themselves to losing their own kinds of jobs. But of course, those skills may still be important in the future, not necessarily those particular tasks. So I see it as a risk of automation rather than job loss. But the headlines either predicting, there are actual headlines, robots will take your jobs and the like. Others saying that don't worry about it, new jobs will come about. So extreme positions usually in the headlines. The one I would draw your attention to is from the Japanese company. This is a insurance company, Fukoku Insurance Company, listed company in Japan. They replaced 30 adjusters with AI, a system that cost them $1.2 million. They were able to recoup the cost of the investment within a year, and they are paying the salaries of those 30 laid off workers for the rest of what would have been their careers. Productivity has increased. Obviously, the technology works 24 hours. Most of these specific tasks can be done by the technology. They've actually improved, raised their levels of profits. So this is coming even to white-collar work already. There are restaurants without waiters and the like. So AI is real. It's not only in manufacturing, but in even some of the tasks, white-collar work, university-educated professionals and the like. I want to mention the concept which Nobel Prize in economics Dan Tinbergen coined back in the 70s. In his analysis of inequality, he put forward the hypothesis that technology constantly changes the demand for skills, the type of skills that are needed in industry, and education systems respond by training for those skills. So he saw it as a race. Technology changed, education systems had to react. The conclusion was that if the race wasn't won by education, there'd be massive inequality because the wages for those people that could get jobs would increase. The wages that couldn't adjust would not increase. We'd see a gap in earnings. So source of inequality would be technological change if education systems can't respond. Golden and Katz, who have a book with the same title, The Race Between Education and Technology, also argued that for most of the 20th century, education systems were winning this race. They were able to produce the skills, increase the level of achievement of students in the United States, and they were able to keep up with changing demands. They argued by the end of the 20th century, as inequality increased, part of this was due to the technological change and the fact that education systems were no longer keeping up. So education, the hypothesis being no longer the great equalizer. In fact, it's keeping back people's opportunities and decreasing the prospects for economic growth. This is research we did on the returns to education, and I'm comparing it here to the enrollment rate for higher education. These are global figures. So in 1970, only about 10% of students went on to university worldwide. This increases to more than 30% today. So huge increase. Most of that seems to have occurred in the last decade and a half or so, since about 2000. And the flat line, the bluish line, is the returns to higher education. And they were about 15% in 1970 when enrollment was about 10%. They're about 15% in 2010 when enrollment is above 30%. So something has definitely happened in the demand for skills. Either the level of skills being produced are of poor quality and therefore not in high demand, so the rate of return is actually going up, and many people are earning essentially rents for their skills because of the scarcity of those skills, or the demand for skills is increasing at such a rate that the sheer numbers are not keeping up. Given the increase in sheer numbers, I suspect that the quality of education is also at fault, and we do have evidence that the quality of education in especially developing countries is not keeping up, not increasing sufficiently. So we do have a shift, and perhaps early evidence that the race is being won so far by technology, and education systems are not keeping pace with those demands. And it's something that I'd like to develop going forward. So who are those workers or students, potential workers that are most likely at risk of automation? Who's going to end up in those jobs or tasks that are going to be easy to automate and won't be needed in the future? In our paper, we estimate the probability of being in an automation-safe occupation, meaning those occupations or tasks less likely to be automated, increase with the level of education. So good news for highly educated people, bad news for those with less than university education. The probability of being in an automated task much higher at the lower levels of education, and ability to avoid those kinds of tasks much higher at the higher education level. So what can we do to protect ourselves against these kinds of changes? This is historical. This is the Korean experience, and it's an example that the Education Finance Commission that Gordon Brown led and which we contributed to, looked at the experience of Korea as an example of kind of sequential increases to the level of education. So they started off post-war, focused on basic education. When they mastered that level, shifted public funds to higher levels of schooling, and eventually got to high levels of secondary and now higher education. About 80% of secondary school graduates go to university in Korea. So a country well on its way to protecting people from automation. In fact, starting to build some of those new skills into the system. The other implication for education systems, and something that will hit lower income countries the most, is that we see a clear correlation between the achievement levels, as measured here by PISA scores, and increasing the probability of being in an automation-safe occupation. So the higher the PISA score, the less likely you're going to be in one of those tasks. And again, these are from household surveys. So we're seeing those countries with low achievement levels more likely to produce people into those kinds of occupations that are not safe from automation going forward. And this presents a particular challenge for these underperforming education systems that have not mastered the basics at a time when the demand for skills is growing high around the world. So they won't be able to keep up with the numbers of skills demanded, so they'll lose the global race, and they're also not going to be able to produce the skills needed for keeping people in jobs that are less likely to be automated. We also are seeing by achievement level a much higher probability in middle income and low income countries. The production of those kinds of skills that are less likely to be automated are in a great deficit. So very few people in low and middle income countries are producing achievement levels above level 5, which is the highest level on PISA. So the safest level of learning, very few education systems are producing that. Much more in high income countries, and in low income countries, very few even produce levels 2 and above. So 50% of students in middle income countries that do PISA tests are in the level 2 and below. So essentially functionally illiterate. So a big challenge for most education systems to raise achievement levels for the majority of their students in low and middle income countries, and for a significant proportion even in higher income countries. The other solution that's often proposed is skills training. Skills training or retraining is the proposed solution for people that are dislocated. It's also the solution for dealing with the prospects of automation. So producing skills for jobs, as it's called. In our analysis, we find that the vocational systems are more likely to produce people that work in those occupations that are most likely to be automated. So we're purposely producing people for jobs that are likely not to exist in the future. Not to say that they might not also learn other skills that could be transferred to new jobs, but in most developing country education systems, the vocational track is usually the track that is given to people who don't pass the exams for general, secondary, and the college or university course. These are usually dead-end tracks for students who fail selection exams. And most of those systems are producing, if they're producing skills, are definitely for skills for the 20th century, not for the 21st century. So poor preparation of basic skills and a preparation in a likely skill that may not exist in the future. In systems that have very good vocational education systems, Swiss, Austrian, and the like, you're also getting a high level of achievement, and those students are probably less likely to face the dislocations. But in most vocational systems around the world, we're preparing people for skills that are likely not to exist. They're also more expensive programs, so it's a very costly outcome. So some lessons. The countries that are doing well, meaning less likely to produce people for redundant tasks, are those countries that focused on getting the basic skills early. Reading comprehension. To give you one example, Vietnam, a real outlier among developing countries with PISA scores above the OECD average. The productivity of their primary schooling is about 2 times that of countries in its income level. So a student in a Vietnamese primary school learns twice as much as, say, a student in Peru or Ethiopia. So those early reading skills translate into success in school later on. The other high return investment is early childhood development and preschool education programs. In our Human Capital Index, we produced, in addition to an overall human capital score, a learning score. These are the harmonized learning scores. You can see every country on the top 10 list is from East Asia or Europe. East Asia and Europe. So most countries from other parts of the world are very far behind the top performers, and these high achievement levels are also correlated with keeping people safe from automation. Just by way of interest, where does the Czech Republic lie on our harmonized learning score? These scores include PISA and everything else that the Czech Republic has done, which I believe is Pearls and Tims, correct? So these would be harmonized as well. So these are achievement levels significantly above the international average. Which skills specifically are education systems not providing? These would include problem-solving skills. Some of these can be measured in the PISA math. Usually assessment systems don't. Learning skills, communication skills, absent from most curriculums, personal management skills, and social skills. And we've seen for every one of these an increase in demand when it's measured, and we've also seen an increase in the returns to those skills. Some of these can easily be incorporated into secondary school or your primary school curriculums. Most often they are not. There are also skills that can be learned early in life, later in life. So that's the good news. The problem is most education systems do not revolve around these skills or incorporate most of these skills. Also not clear if the education system is willing to change the curriculum to bring these into play. We've seen few examples of the incorporation of these skills into education systems. So we talked about Industry 4.0. What about, where are we on education? are we anywhere close to Education 4.0? If you think of this characterization of education systems and where we are now and where we need to be, hard to argue that we're not still in Education 1.0. Most classrooms around the world look pretty much like this one, not as nice, but definitely with a teacher and students listening to that teacher, memorizing and repeating what they say. Very little collaboration or technology in most classrooms around the world, and in very little progress beyond the rote memorization and learning around the world. We're certainly not at a connected or personalized option, let alone what we need going forward to say that we're close to Education 4.0. So education systems are failing most people in the world to prepare for the skills that are needed in the future. That means most of those social skills, teamwork, and the like. So the implications for education systems, we are reaching a level of educational attainment where increases in access are going to become very expensive, either because reaching the last 5–10% will be more costly, but also higher levels of schooling become more expensive. So it's a critical decision point because more of the same will just be more expensive. Increasing cognitive skills is also very difficult. We seem to know much more today than ever about what it takes, but we don't seem to do it in most education systems. And the gap that we see in our human capital index is very wide and very serious at a time when skills are in demand. We also have very little evidence on how to improve non-cognitive skills. We seem to know what they are. We know that industry demands them. We know that the returns are high, but difficult to bring this into our school systems. So, few conclusions and a couple of recommendations. One is most education systems still need to focus on the basics, meaning even basic reading and math, the learning skills in the early grades. We need to drastically change the school system's productivity. Too little learning is taking place over the years, yet we know that the successful education systems are performing at least twice the level of most education systems. We need to teach those relevant skills, and we need to avoid early specialization. So unless you have the setup of Switzerland or Austria, for most countries, the dual system is not going to work going forward. And since higher education is becoming a necessary requirement for most jobs, we do need to figure out how to finance this, because most public systems will not be able to provide high-quality university for everyone. And if we leave it to private financing, we're going to have a very unequal society. So some ideas on research and what we need. We still need to tackle the problem of the productivity of schooling, and this might be an area where technology can actually help. And we do have a few pilots of where technology has been used to increase productivity. We definitely need better teachers in most countries. High-performing systems, especially in East Asia, are those that select the best into teaching and support them throughout their careers. Teaching relevant skills, still not clear whether this is something that classrooms can incorporate, or curriculums can incorporate, or whether we need other kinds of public programs. Financing higher education, I mentioned already, government won't be able to provide high-quality schooling for all. Private financing will be unequal. So we need some system that works. Loans, traditional loans are proving very difficult. We need to think of financing education today with future earnings, income contingent programs. And finally, on how to use technology to improve not only teaching, but also to improve the management of the education system. If skills are going to constantly change over time, people need to get those skills recognized. Technology can help us along those lines. Blockchain has been used to certify skills and to allow people to prove their credentials going forward. So, thank you.
So, thank you. Does it work? Here. Thank you very much for presentation. And as I announced at the beginning, I will top up the presentation, but by very short reflection, just to put these global trends and global proportions into very specific concrete numbers for the Czech Republic. I do not aspire to present here any kind of analysis, which is in fact doesn't exist here in Czech Republic in detail, but these are several numbers just to enhance our discussions and the questions. So can you try the bottom? Yeah, another PowerPoint. The one, yes, this one. And can you launch it? Start it from the beginning. Yes, there, and really few things. I took several graphs from a recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers on this topic, but it's again worldwide, but it's good that Czech Republic is included there. It's good to have. And I will just repeat few key facts. What are the key factors indicating that there is danger that automation will affect people, labor market, and so on. This is middle and low educated people. These are routine professions. Okay. And it was explained in greater detail what are the risks of vocational education. That it depends on what is the quality of parallel education, the general education of vocational educated people. So I will stop here reminding, and I will go to a few graphs. I'm skipping those who show what was said here already, using just another study and other examples who will be affected, and I will show you a couple of comparisons. So here, this is the educational structure of employed in it's probably European Union. Czech Republic shows very low proportion of low educated, but also very low proportion of high educated, tertiary educated. So we have a very large proportion of those middle and low educated. It's saying, you know, where it comes from, right? It comes from the communist regime, which didn't open the tertiary system early enough. It was opened only recently, 10, 15 years ago. So this is the first factor putting Czech Republic into danger. The second, that even our current educational system is still focusing too much we focus the most among all the European countries on vocational programs at the upper secondary level, and the least, almost the least, on the general programs. So, by the way, we admit universities more than 40% of the educational cohort, while we prepare for tertiary studies only 20% of pupils. The rest is, in fact, not being prepared suitably because they study vocational professional programs who partly prepare, partly do not prepare. So this another factor. First-time tertiary graduation rates. These are about the young generations. How many Czechs will have tertiary education? Will we quickly achieve those high proportions of tertiary education? We will not, because look, this is younger than 30 expectations. We are still at the end. We are still not on the track. We are still losing. So, if they put all these things together and they process it by computation, this study, I mean the PricewaterhouseCoopers study, and they compute the potential job automation rates by country, this is dangerous. The Czech Republic shows up together with Slovakia and Slovenia and Lithuania as the most probably affected by this risk. Whichever graph you look at there, you see Czech Republic as an outlier. Here it's relative impact from employment shares across countries on an index from 0 to 10, and here is the relative impact from the automobility of jobs. Czech Republic being here. Log industrial robots per 10,000 employees in the manufacturing industry. Showing Czech Republic here says, yes, we have the largest employment share in manufacturing in the EU, but at the same time, we have only few robots working there. So who is working there? People. Working with middle, low skills on very routine tasks, which are prone to this risk. So this is this graph, and the total aggregate is tables. There are 7 tables like this, which show that in the series of how to say, they call it algorithm wave, augmentation wave, and autonomy wave, which come in time. The Czech Republic is expected heavily affected with few other countries like it. It's on the fourth line there. So you have a link there, you can go back to the study. Of course, all these are predictions because none of us is sure what will happen. We accept that something very different from now will happen. And this is in fact the topic of this event here. So I will stop here.